The daughter-in-law abandoned her husband and child, ran away with an older man for 5 years, and during the marriage even had a child with him. After being abandoned, she knelt down, begging her in-laws to help register the girl in the household registration system, HUKU. In this scene, the woman dressed in pink is the one asking for help today, Lee Lee-jun. At that moment, she was kneeling on the ground, crying desperately. She begged her in-laws to show compassion and help register her daughter's HUKU, China's household registration system, under her husband's name. 5 years ago, when she was 7 months pregnant, she walked out of her home. Now, 5 years have passed, and the child is also 5 years old. She's old enough for school, but because she doesn't have a HUKU, no school will accept her enrollment. With no alternatives, Lee went back to her in-laws' house, hoping they would help resolve her daughter's registration problem. But her father and mother-in-law refused. They had no intention of registering the child. Which raises the question, what could have happened in this family for 2 grandparents to treat their own granddaughter with such coldness? Next, we follow reporter Xiao Dao. Will we be able to uncover the truth? When the reporter received Lee Lee-jun's call for help, he rushed immediately to the agreed meeting place. The moment she saw the reporter, Lee Lee-jun couldn't hold back her grief any longer. Crying uncontrollably, she began to tell her story. Her daughter's name is Wei Wei. She is 5 years old now, the age when children start school. But because she has no registration, the school refused to accept her. The reporter was puzzled. Why would a child not have a HUKU? Faced with the question, Lee Lee-jun sighed helplessly. She explained that she had been married to her husband for more than 10 years. The couple had 2 daughters. After the birth of the second, since her husband refused to work, she decided to look for a job to support the household. It was during that time that she met Wei Wei's biological father. Even though she already had a family, she didn't push him away. Instead, in a moment of weakness, she started a relationship she now calls a mistake. Soon after, she discovered she was pregnant. She knew very well that the child's origin was shameful, and she feared that if the truth came out, she would face endless gossip. The promises made by Wei Wei's biological father moved her deeply, to the point where she made the decision she would regret for the rest of her life. Without even divorcing her husband, she ran off to Guangdong with the other man, carrying the baby in her belly. There, she gave birth to Wei Wei. Out of shame, she didn't use her real name at the hospital and instead gave them false information. This meant the hospital never issued a birth certificate. And that's why the HUKU problem was never solved, and she never paid it much attention. For the next 5 years, she raised her daughter in Guangdong. But time passed quickly. Wei Wei turned 5, and now it was time for her to go to school. Yet, without a HUKU, no school would accept her. Speaking of her mistakes, Lee Lee-jun cried bitterly, overwhelmed with regret. When Wei Wei was born, some even suggested she give the baby away to another family. But as Lee said, she's my own flesh and blood. She could never do it. Raising the girl alone all these years was extremely difficult. And since she had never divorced, her household registration was still tied to her husband, Liu Chunming. For Wei Wei to get a HUKU, his approval was required. For 5 years, Li avoided facing her husband. But now, for her daughter's sake, she had no choice. So she decided to ask her husband for help, hoping he would agree. With her daughter in her arms and her bags on her back, Lee Lee-jun returned to her hometown, searching for a solution. But what would happen when Liu Chunming saw his wife show up with another man's child, asking him to register the girl under his name? And how would the Liu family react to this child? When Lee Lee-jun stepped onto the narrow road leading to her old village, she sighed deeply. It had been 5 years since she had left her home. As she neared the Liu residence, she saw her in-laws playing outside with her older daughter. She hadn't seen her eldest in 5 years. The girl was now over 10, and the 2 sisters even resembled each other. When the mother-in-law saw Lee return, she greeted her warmly, took the child into her arms, and gently played with Wei Wei. Finally, she recounted to the reporter the story of her daughter-in-law and her son. After they married, the couple's relationship had been good. When their first daughter was born, the family of 3 lived happily. 5 years ago, the daughter-in-law told them she was pregnant again. The entire family was thrilled. But then, for reasons unknown, she left home without a word and never came back. At the time, The Liu family feared something bad had happened to Li Lijun. They searched everywhere, asking relatives and friends for help, but found no trace of her. Only when they received a text message from a man did they finally understand why she had disappeared. When they discovered that Li Lijun was pregnant with another man's child, they were furious. The mother-in-law then told the reporter that her son was at home. The reporter suggested that Li meet her husband, whom she hadn't seen in 5 years, but Li flatly refused. Faced with her refusal, the reporter didn't insist and went alone to look for Liu Chunming. When Liu learned that his wife had returned home with a little girl, he didn't explode with the expected anger. Instead, he pounded his chest with a look of pure pain. No matter how many questions the reporter asked, Liu Chunming didn't say a single word. The reporter couldn't make sense of it, so he turned to the neighbors for answers. They explained that Liu Chunming used to be a normal man who worked away from home to support his wife and children. But after Li Lijun's sudden departure, his emotional state collapsed. Later, he even left town alone to look for her, and when he returned, he was no longer the same man. Worried, his family took him to the hospital, where he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Because of this, Li Lijun's in-laws harbored deep resentment toward her. They believed she had broken their son beyond repair, leaving him in his current condition. But was there more to this story? Were there hidden truths yet to be revealed? I beg you, give me back my household registration. I know this request might lead you to sue me in court. I know you could take legal action against me any day, but I don't care. Until you give me back my registration, I'll keep asking. A woman abandoned her husband and daughter, ran away with an older man for 5 years, and even had his child during her marriage. After being abandoned, she returned and knelt before her in-laws, begging them to register the girl. Li Lijun's father-in-law, outraged, told the reporter that when she left home, she was already 7 months pregnant. For those 7 months, the Liu family treated the unborn child as if it were their own blood. Yet, after she disappeared for 5 years, when they saw Wei Wei, doubts crept in. Could this girl really be their biological granddaughter? That's why they demanded a DNA test between their son and the child. If Wei Wei turned out to be of Liu blood, they would agree to register her. But if not, they planned to take Li Lijun to court, demanding compensation for all the years of damage and loss she had caused. The elderly couple's stance was firm. Li Lijun, saddened, then shared her own story. When she was a child, her own mother abandoned the family and never returned. She grew up with only her father. All her life, she longed for maternal love, someone who could truly care for her. She met her husband through an introduction and soon married him. She thought she would be happy in marriage, but later discovered that Liu Chunming suffered from mental illness. She couldn't imagine spending her life tied to a man in such a condition, so she asked for a divorce. No one around her understood her decision. Her husband, in response, verbally and physically abused her. That's when she decided to go out and earn her own living. It was during this period that she met another man. Their passion was intense, and soon they became involved. With no way out, she became pregnant and fled with the baby in her belly. Now, looking back, Li Lijun deeply regrets her choices. She says she's willing to accept any punishment. Her only wish is for her youngest daughter's household registration to be resolved. She begged her in-laws to show compassion and allow Wei Wei to be registered so she could go to school. After all, the mistakes were hers alone. The child bore no blame. But how would the Liu family respond to her plea? The in-laws were adamant. They refused. They declared that unless the issues between her and their son were settled, they would never agree to register the child. Hearing this, Li Lijun felt hopeless. She took her daughter and returned with the reporter to her father's home. She hadn't seen her father in 5 years. When he learned of the situation, he too worried for his granddaughter. Years earlier, he had even gone to the police station to ask if there was any way to register the girl under his own name. But since the biological mother was still alive, the police had refused. The Liu family, however, made it clear, if their granddaughter were to be registered under their household, Li Lijun would have to pay 500,000 yuan in compensation. Hearing this, Li's father was helpless. He had no way of raising that kind of money. At his age, being forced to run around for his daughter's mistakes left him exhausted. Li Lijun, too, was weighed down with guilt. In 5 years, she had never once returned to her father's home. And now, because of her daughter's registration problem, she had dragged her father into more suffering. She felt like an unworthy daughter. Back in her room, Li Lijun broke down emotionally once again. 4 years, in her struggle to get Weiwei registered, she hadn't been able to eat or sleep properly, crying every day. Her eyesight had worsened, and her face had grown weary and aged. The reporter, after hearing all this, remained puzzled. After all, the Liu family had never doubted that the child might be their blood. So why had Li Lijun left so suddenly when she was 7 months pregnant? Was it really just because she believed her husband was mentally ill and wanted to get away? At that point, Li Lijun began to explain to the reporter what had actually happened. During her marriage with Liu Chunming, they had 2 children. When she left, the second baby was still a newborn. At the time, her husband was lazy, unwilling to work or earn money. Her mother-in-law, pitying her son, forced Li Lijun to go out and work, while she stayed home to care for the 2 little ones. With no other option, Li Lijun found a small job nearby. But one day, when she returned from work around 5 in the afternoon, she walked into the house and saw her youngest daughter lying on the bed with a heavy blanket over her head. When she called out to her, she noticed the child's lips were purple. Panicked, she rushed the girl to the hospital. The result was devastating. Her daughter had already died of suffocation. The death of her second child struck Li Lijun like a thunderbolt. For half a year, she lived consumed by grief, dreaming every night that the little girl was calling her mom, and waking up in tears, screaming her name. That was the episode that made her completely lose hope in her husband's family. She no longer wanted to live by his side, and so she decided to go work in another city. By chance, she met Weiwei's father, a man more than 20 years older than her. He was extremely attentive and patient. Little by little, Li Lijun allowed herself to be won over. Soon they were living together, and she became pregnant with Weiwei. Even knowing what it would mean to have that child, she didn't want to destroy another family, nor abandon her own daughter. So, she broke off with the man and decided to raise the girl alone in Guangdong. 5 years have passed since then, and Weiwei's biological father has disappeared, leaving no contact at all. But the issue remained: how to resolve her daughter's registration. "I beg you, give me back my Huku. I know you could take me to court for this, accuse me any day, but I don't care. I just want my registration back, so I can settle my daughter's Huku." A woman abandoned her husband and daughter, ran away with an older man for 5 years. During the marriage, she even had his child. After being abandoned, she returned, kneeling before her in-laws, begging them to register the girl. For Weiwei to be able to study like other children, Li Lijun once again went to her in-laws' home, hoping for a turnaround. But when they saw her arriving with the girl in her arms, they were outraged. They told the reporter that years ago, their daughter-in-law had run away pregnant, abandoning the family and the eldest daughter just to live with that man in Guangdong. During all these years, besides raising the eldest granddaughter, they had also cared for their son, who had lost his mind from the shock and developed schizophrenia. Life had been extremely harsh, and they had spent a lot of money. Now, too old to work, they feared they wouldn't be able to support their sick son and their granddaughter. In their view, all this misfortune was caused by Li Lijun's escape. Therefore, they declared that all the expenses of these years should be repaid by her. Unless Li Lijun paid, they would never agree to register Weiwei. Hearing this, Li Lijun felt cornered. She explained that although she had worked to support her daughter, she hadn't been able to save almost anything. She also said she no longer had any contact with the girl's biological father. Her only request was for Weiwei to be registered so she could live a normal life. Even if she were later charged with bigamy, she said she would accept any consequence. But no matter how much she pleaded, the in-laws refused. At that point, to the Liu family, Li Lijun had lost all credibility. She insisted, saying Weiwei was a sweet, loving, and intelligent little girl. But because she had grown up without a stable home, she had become extremely shy. For the past 5 years, Li Lijun had tried to teach her alone, but because she had little education and worked constantly, the girl hadn't learned much of anything, not even reading or forming complete sentences. If things went on like this, her childhood would be lost. For Li Lijun, putting Weiwei in school was absolutely essential. She even tried to see if her daughter could join a local kindergarten, but every school turned her away for lack of Huku. Disheartened, she went back home with her daughter. On the way, they saw 2 boys playing with ducklings, and Weiwei, curious, walked over, smiling and watching the animals. It was clear how much she loved small animals and interacting with other kids. But since her mother spent the whole day working and sometimes locked her in the house, The girl had become withdrawn and slow to develop. Still, without a Huku, Wei Wei remained excluded from school. To try to break the impasse, the reporters sought out the village committee and organized a mediation. There, in front of the local leaders, Li Lijun admitted her mistakes, saying she was willing to accept any punishment as long as her daughter could be registered. She begged only that they not take out their anger on the child. But no matter how much she cried and pleaded, the in-laws were unmoved. She even fell to her knees before them, begging them to release the Huku, but they stood firm, they would not. They declared they would never register another man's child under their son's name. Only a court order could force them. Hearing this, the village head suggested an alternative, that Li Lijun return to live with her husband. But both she and her in-laws immediately rejected the idea. With no agreement, the families left in conflict. Searching for a solution, the reporter then went to the local police station. There, the officers explained that according to the law, it was enough to prove the biological relationship between mother and child to process the registration. Li Lijun's Huku was valid. Therefore, Wei Wei could be registered directly under her name. All that was needed was a DNA test. Upon hearing this, Li Lijun was overjoyed. She took her daughter to the testing center, and a few days later, the results were sent to the police. At last, Wei Wei was officially registered. Li Lijun wept with relief. The problem was finally solved. She said that from now on, she would raise her daughter on her own, work hard to support her studies, and as soon as possible, resolve her marriage situation with Liu Chunming as well. But as a single mother, she knew her future would be far from easy. And what about you? What do you think of this story? Share your opinion in the comments below.
When we look at Li Lijun's story, it's hard to be truly surprised. Anyone who follows the Chinese scene has already noticed that this kind of plot repeats itself like an endless cycle. It's always the same: a woman bored with the routine of marriage, disappointed with a husband who doesn't meet her expectations, decides to go after something new. And this something new usually comes in the form of an older man who promises the world, whispers sweet words, and sells the illusion of a better life. She believes it, dives into the adventure, and for a while even convinces herself that she made the right choice. But reality always comes knocking and hard. In Li Lijun's case, she abandoned her husband and daughter, pregnant with another man's child, believing she would find a fresh start. 5 years later, the sandcastle collapses, the lover disappears, the daughter has no registration, and life sends the bill. And where does she go? Back to square one. Back to her in-laws' house, begging on her knees that they accept another man's daughter as their legitimate granddaughter. It's curious, if not ironic, how in these adventures, there's always a promise of freedom and happiness, but what remains in the end is shame, regret, and closed doors. It's like a script written 1,000 times. They leave believing they can escape the monotony, but the escape is never complete. Something always goes wrong. Sometimes the lover breaks his promises, sometimes the money runs out, sometimes society crushes them with judgment. And almost always, the innocent child ends up at the center of the drama. And here comes the greatest irony. In the end, the ones left behind are the ones who must deal with the consequences. The deceived husband, the resentful in-laws, the family that carried the burden of public shame. They are the ones who must decide whether or not to take responsibility for something they never asked for. And the woman, who thought she had found something better, comes back empty-handed, asking for help, asking for compassion. Of course, you could say that each family has its own problems, its own wounds, but the pattern is undeniable. Whenever I hear stories like this, I can't help but think that Chinese society is like a repeated soap opera stuck on loop. The names change, the cities change, but the plot is always the same. And so I ask you, is this really a pursuit of happiness, or just an escape from monotony that sooner or later demands an even higher price? In the end, routine may be tough, but these groundless adventures often turn out to be even more cruel. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like down below and share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Li Lijun deserves her in-laws' compassion? Or should she bear the full consequences of the choices she made? I'd love to know your opinion. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more stories like this, full of drama, irony, and life lessons that keep repeating themselves. See you in the next video.